Hello, my name is Crosby Blair, and this is my presentation for the Change Intervention Performance Assessment for Education 584. My change plan revolves around using a restorative justice approach to manage student behaviors at Lincoln Elementary School, at which I'm currently a fifth grade teacher. So I'm going to start by reviewing the paper that I wrote. First, start talking about the culture and kind of the history of Lincoln overall. It's been a school here in the county since the 1920s, although it's gone through different variations. But it's predominantly a school for African American students, and as such, it kind of has a big role in the surrounding working class community. So talk about that here. Talk about some family involvement nights of importance. Goes on to talk about the immediate school climate, a little different than the culture. The climate right now is kind of at a crossroads. I talk about in here how there's a disparity between the administrators and how classroom teachers feel really supported and almost inspired by one, whereas they feel a bit defeated and deflated by the other. So kind of talk about that dichotomy in here. Moving on to the current discipline policy. Current discipline policy at Lincoln is inconsistent and ineffective. It uses a traditional discipline approach of suspensions and expulsions. It uses a zero tolerance policy in which students that are involved in a fight, even defensively, can be suspended or removed from school. So kind of talking about that, highlighting some of the high rate of referrals and documentations, highlighting the fact that 911 is called routinely, and that police are present at the school at almost a weekly basis, and kind of also talk about the logistics of writing and processing referral or documentation under the current policy. Move on to talk about the concerns with that current discipline policy, in so much that it's not effective, it doesn't deter unwanted behavior, nor does it reduce the amount of offenses, and highlighting that's because of a standardized approach and a traditional approach to discipline instead of using a more restorative approach. Which leads into my proposed change initiative plan. Focuses on using a restorative approach to create consistency in dealing with unwanted behaviors, to allow the wrongdoer an opportunity for reflection, and to treat each offensive act in terms of its unique circumstance. As part of this, I want to use a discussion platform that's called a community circle. It's a way for voices to be heard, for reactions to be shared. It's a main component of this change plan. I also should highlight or emphasize that I use a term throughout called situational stakeholders, and this involves anybody that was involved or affected by an unwanted behavior. This could include students, the actual wrongdoer, the student that committed the offense, the victim of any offense, the classroom teacher or the witnessing staff member, a counselor, an administrator, and even an outside family member. It's an opportunity for people to come together and to kind of hear the multiple perspectives and maximize the rehabilitative atmosphere. As part of a community circle in restorative justice overall, you want to generate what's called a natural consequence. A natural consequence is a logical counterbalance to a committed offense. It kind of aligns with the offense, and it's not a standardized punishment. It's actually the opposite of standardized punishments. It's a punishment or a consequence that kind of fits naturally with whatever offense has occurred. And those things are highlighted. The difference between a traditional approach and a restorative approach are highlighted here. Traditional is talking top down, very authoritative, whereas a restorative is people centered and offers opportunities for restoration. So as phase one of this plan, I want to train counselors and use innovation to offer hope. Staff members right now at Lincoln are very frustrated with the inconsistencies in behavior management, and I want to use this plan to kind of offer them some hope and motivate them to make this change. Phase two, using classroom teachers to establish urgency and create budge. Got to establish the need for this change, which thankfully is pretty easy because most people already see this need, and also create buzz about it. Get that excitement, get that genuine conversation going, sustain the buzz to help help implement this change. Phase 3, incorporating peer mentors and developing intrinsic motivation. Training peer mentors as co-facilitators in community circles will allow for greater transparency, for student agency. It'll make the wrongdoer feel more comfortable and also help instill intrinsic drive in our 5th grade students. Walk through an example here about a fight and how it would be dealt with in the current policy and how it could be dealt with in a restorative approach. Go through to the rationale, full and stern professional capacity, specifically the social capacity. This plan really builds the social capacity of the school, and also works through the diffusion of innovation. That's said by Robinson, but it's a theory by Everett Rogers, in which he uses 5 components: relative advantage, compatibility, simplicity and ease of use, trialability, and observable results, to kind of gauge how successful an innovation will be. So working through those components as well in this section. It takes me to some barriers. 3 main barriers I highlight are not creating enough buzz, and then 2 Cotter's mistakes that Cotter recognizes, that of declaring victory too soon and also neglecting to anchor changes firmly into the culture. Going through that and then into the managing the operations section. This section is talking about when community circles can actually happen in the school day, and then professional development, of which you're about to see an example, opportunities for feedback, and then family involvement and community involvement is a huge aspect of this change plan. Finding the right inviter. For this case, it might be a church member, a preacher, a priest, or a sports coach, somebody that can kind of take this back to their respective part of the community and use it in their own regard. And it would really help to kind of help students internalize this process if they're using it in other aspects of their life as well, and not just in school. So that takes me to a presentation or an example of a module that could be used at a professional development session. And this just kind of talks about what restorative justice is, kind of defines it, emphasizing that it's the repairing of the harm caused by the unwanted behavior and not just punishing the harm. Talking about some aspects of restorative justice. You can think of these as the cornerstones of what restorative justice is. Again, a nice visual to kind of highlight the differences between a traditional versus a restorative approach. Another visual to kind of bring it home and to highlight the circle or the geometric design behind community circles. So that's just kind of an introduction into the approach overall. And then here, the facilitator would implement some current school data. So I have some superficial data right here, but this could be much more in detail about as far as how many referrals or documentations, the amount of suspensions, how many times 911 has been called. So that's another visual way to show this here. The referrals and the documentations for the last 3 school years. Again, the facilitator would kind of have to tweak this to their specific needs. Highlighting what a community circle is, involving these situational stakeholders, describing and defining what situational stakeholders are. And then this is a great video. I'm not going to show the whole thing here, but this is a video that kind of highlights a school out in California that had gone from using suspensions and expulsions and having one of the higher rates of suspensions and expulsions to using restorative justice and no longer having that same issue. It's a 6-minute video. It's really good at highlighting and kind of condensing this whole approach. And then ending this professional development session with a mock community circle in which staff members are invited to kind of witness a community circle in action and to be thinking specifically about this last question: how was this process different than a traditional discipline approach? So I think this approach could be well implemented. I think it would be extremely successful, and I think it's quite feasible because it doesn't require any extra money or resources from the school. It's something that we could do as soon as school starts, and it could easily be shared and implemented in other schools across the county. So thank you for listening, and goodbye.